Hey, everybody. I am here with Andrew Peterson, songwriter, musician, author, and stone stacking wall builder. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
I want to ask you about that in just a second. Now, if the listeners aren't familiar with your name, they'd probably know some of your work, especially some of your songs. Like recently, Is He Worthy? That beautiful song that you wrote was picked up by Chris Tomlin and kind of made popular on the radio and in churches. We sing it in our church. And I just want to thank you for that song. Man, when I get to the line where it's like, does our God intend to dwell again with us? He does. Like, I always get teary eyed, and I'm not even like an emotional guy at all. So thank you.
That's
So
awesome. It's
yeah,
it's the gospel.
it's the
That's the great.
gospel.
Like what I love about songs like that is like I get emotional when I do that song too, and it's
Mm,
because like all those little lines are like verbatim scripture. It's
yeah.
all there. You know, it's
Yeah.
not there's not much poetic license being taken, so you can kind of hang your hat on it as truth. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I remember talking to Jenny Lee Riddle, and she said the same thing about Revelation song. She's like, it's just all the passages about God on his throne. So, like, she's like, I didn't have to write much, but no, but you come on, you put so much beauty and poetry into that song. So you gotta, we'll give God the glory, but we'll give you a little bit of credit. Yeah,
Well, thank you, thank you.
yeah, for sure. Now, and also another thing that you may or may not be known for, but I want to encourage the listeners to just check this out. Like this book series that you wrote called the Wingfeather Saga is, I'm going to just say it, it's to me better than Narnia, the Narnia series, which is like my kids and I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old daughter, man, and we devoured those books, the whole series. It was so well written, and the ending, I won't give a spoiler, but blew my mind. And so man, so you're one of the most creative people I know, and so that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about creativity, the theology of creativity, the creative process, as Andrew Peterson understands it, and your experience with it. So real quickly though, I would love to just poke into the wall building, stone stacking thing, because like I don't necessarily, I think it's pretty self-explanatory what it is, but I would just love to ask this question. Like, what are some principles that you've learned in stone stacking that apply to other areas of your life? And I'm sure there are many, but just throwing that
Yeah,
weird question out
that
there.
is a good question. That's not a weird question. You're making me think already. I think it so just for your listeners' sake, like I started doing this because here in outside of Nashville where we live kind of in the country, and a friend of ours gave us the gift of a 30-year garden plan. And the first thing on the list was this front garden, like a cottage garden that was enclosed by a stone wall. And I priced it, and it was $100 a foot if you get somebody else to build you a stone wall.
Wow.
And it's about 100 feet. So that's 10 grand, right? So I was like, no way. And so I just kind of looked around and realized that there's a bunch of rocks around Nashville, and I started throwing them in the back of my truck. And it took several months, but I eventually collected it. I didn't pay a dime,
That's amazing.
and I just YouTubed it. And so in the process, the one of the cool things about it was that the long kind of, you get into this feeling of flow. Like once you get a big pile of rocks, it was really satisfying to reach the point where about a week into the process, I could look about 20 feet away at a section of the wall and see a little gap, and I could see a rock, and I would know before I put the rock in the gap that it would fit, and it
Yes.
would slide like a glove. It was just kind of amazing that your body ends up intuiting what needs to happen next once you get into this rhythm, and you're constantly turning the rocks every which way to try to find a way to piece it together.
Mm.
And it ends up being this really meditative process. But what I was going to say though was that like my friend who gave me the garden plan, she did not plan for there to be this archway in the wall. Like there's this Roman arch that I built, no mortar. It's just held up by gravity, and so I kind of just was building the wall, and I was like, I think an arch could be kind of cool here. And then when she saw it, she was like, "What a great idea! I'm so glad that you improved on my design." And so I think that that's the one of the cool things is that it's like the Lord invites you into this creative process. It's like He says, "Hey, here's a template, but also put an arch in if you feel like it." You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like He invites us into to participate with the architect in the building of this thing. So that was one of the things that I remember being struck by, was that it wasn't like she gave me this recipe that I wasn't allowed to add a little more butter if I wanted, you know.
Mm. I love that. Do you add a lot of butter to your cookies?
Oh man, if at all possible.
That's awesome. So, okay, well, let's talk about. There's a few things already in there that we'll touch on in a little bit, like getting into a state of flow, and also like co-laboring with God as the co-architect. But I would love to just hear your thoughts about the theology of creativity. Like, God is the creator, we're created in his image, right? And we mirror the creator's image by creating and being creative. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about how you understand creativity from a theological perspective.
Well, I it's kind of a not a moving target, but it's like a something that I'm still kind of getting to the bottom of in many ways.
Mm.
Like just recently, somebody pointed out, and I didn't know this. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but somebody pointed out that the word "create" in Scripture is only ever applied to God.
Mm.
That people don't create, we make, but God
Mm.
creates. Which
Wow.
I think is this cool distinctive, right? That like he's the one who makes something from nothing. We take what he has made and we rearrange it, and we add the stone wall,
Yeah.
that, or add the arch to the stone wall. And so I like that idea that like we're just kind of like playing around on the floor with a bunch of Legos that somebody else made, is kind of how it goes. And so a lot of my thinking about creativity was informed by Madeleine L'Engle and her book Walking on Water, which is a marvelous book. And then a lot of it was from Tolkien. It was from his essay on fairy stories, where he coined the word sub-creator. And he was like he argued that one of the highest uses of human creativity is world building.
Mm.
Um, and I'm sure he was a little bit biased because he was a world builder, but there is this sense that like he was creating. The way he put it in a poem was, we make in the manner in which we're made. So God created us, and he made us to be little creators, basically, to go around, set loose on the world, to speak light, And so what I love about that is that it means that it's not just artists who are called to this; it's everybody. And I
Mm.
talk about that in the book, that the idea that when people say that they're creative, that they are creative versus they are a creative, there's a difference there that's really important, I think, because to say I am a creative implies that other people aren't creative, which
Mm.
is not true. Everybody is doing it. So you're always adding to the story of the world. Whether you like to think of yourself that way or not, you are an image bearer, and you are speaking light into the world. And one of the things that we do is we bring order out of chaos, and we fill the void, like in Genesis 1. There's this idea that in the creation account, it's like two things are happening. First, God is bringing order out of chaos, and then he fills the void with things.
Mm.
And so that's kind of what being an artist is, and for that matter, it's what being a human is. And so that's a kind of a flyover of the way I tend to think of it.
That's amazing. I mean, you said something so profound. We are always adding to the story of the world. It's like, wow, God allows us to participate at that level of creation. And that really does reflect like not that we are like gods, obviously, but the autonomy and the honor that he's bestowed upon us to contribute to his creation. And I love that concept. I've never heard that only God is the creator and we make. I've never heard that. That's amazing. So
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
that's so
I love it.
cool.
Like one of the things that I'm working on a book right now, my COVID book, the thing I did while I was in lockdown for a year, was it's a book called The God of the Garden, and it's a lot. It's like basically an expansion of those chapters in Adorning the Dark that are about the stone wall and about our property, and kind of it's framed around trees and my love of trees. And anyway, what I love about it's another way to think of it is that. Like a lot of times we think in America about pristine wilderness as like this high ideal of creation. It's why we have the state parks are kind of sequestered off. But wilderness isn't what we were meant for. We were meant for a garden. Like God put Adam and Eve in a garden. And what a garden is this overlay of creation and culture, right? So there's this wildness, but then there's also these these people that are like set loose on the world who are taking that and creating something else that is more than just wilderness. It's a garden that you can
Mm,
walk around in. So a garden is an overlay of culture and creation. And
wow.
so I think that's another picture of what it is that we do is God has given us the wilderness of his creation, and he said, go and make it more beautiful, add to the beauty of this thing. And so yeah, one of the things that I love, that I also just learned this, is that when God tells Adam and Eve to work and to keep the garden, the next time he uses that phrase is used in the Old Testament is for the priests in the temple. They're called to work and to keep the temple, right? And
Mm,
then there's this picture that in the new creation, the whole world is God's temple, and that we're all these priests walking around working and keeping and caring for this place. So when I think of writing a story or drawing a picture or writing a song, it's like, okay, this is a little picture of me as a priest in God's creation, doing my best to work and to keep with the tools that I've been given, the story that I've been given, and to
mhm.
change it into something that is more beautiful somehow.
That's so good. And something you said, I think creation and culture is the garden. And I thought of the word cultivated, because when you were saying
Yeah,
culture, it's like, oh, those are related terms. Like we can cultivate a garden. And anyway, so it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, man, I'd be curious to ask, like, what is your definition of art? What is art, and what is the purpose of art in the world as a believer?
Oh man, I saw this question ahead of time, and I was like, "Ooh, that's a hard one." I honestly don't know how to articulate a good definition of art. I haven't spent enough time really thinking that through, but I think you know what art isn't is self-aggrandizing, self-expression. I mean, I guess you could call it that. That's the thing is, like as soon as I say something, I'm going to think of the other side of the coin. But but like what it ought not be
Mm,
is merely self-expression, which isn't
mm,
to say that we don't express who we are through our art, but the end goal is ideally um, the glory of God, and so somehow or another we tell our stories, we paint our pictures, we adorn the darkness, as best as we can. But like it's at its best when love is what it is grounded in. Like art is a way to love,
mm,
and so I don't think that our artistic creative works are exempt from the mandate to love our neighbor as ourselves and to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so you it kind of repositions what art is for. When I was a kid, art was for impressing girls, because I wasn't a sports guy. Which the irony is like I don't know many girls in the '80s that were impressed by Batman comic drawings,
yeah.
but that was what I was into at the time. But the it's kind of like a very self-serving thing, and it's not like God can't redeem our bad
Mhm,
motives, but what you're shooting for is this idea that art is a way of laying down our lives for another
mm,
and loving people somehow by telling them the truth, um, as beautifully as you can.
mm. Yeah, and like even in your book or books, the Wingfeather Saga, it's like you didn't necessarily say Jesus or preach the gospel, but you told, I mean, more beautifully than I could ever like articulate, you told the gospel story, and you told the truth. So that's interesting. So we can use art to propagate lies, which the world does, or we can use it to propagate the truth into the darkness. So I never thought about that.
Yeah, I think that's it. And the fun thing about it as a fantasy, not like when I write a song, a lot of times uh I have something that I'm trying to say, very
Mhm.
very specific thing that I'm trying to get across a lot of times. And there's a spectrum. Some songs are more vague and they're just there to kind of like prod it at the idea.
Mhm.
But other times it's like, no, I really actually like Izzy Worthy. It's like I actually want to write a song that draws attention to how good God is and
Mm.
the story. And so and this is kind of a tangent. I don't know if
Go
it's
for
worth
it.
it to do, but
I can always chop it out.
that's true. But in Adorning the Dark, I talk about this idea that when I first moved to Nashville in the late '90s, it was like cool to say, "Well, I'm not a Christian artist. I'm an artist who's a Christian,"
Uh-huh.
and and I get that. I kind of get that there's It's a wrestling with calling and naming what it is that we're doing. And at the time I was like, yeah, that's me. I'm an artist who is a Christian. I'm not a Christian artist. But what that does is it's built into that is a little bit of snootiness about people who are called to explicitly tell the gospel story, right? And so I don't think that has to in what's built into it too is this assumption that if you are a Christian artist, if you're explicitly Christian in content, that it's not art somehow. But that doesn't apply to Michelangelo,
Yeah.
doesn't apply to the chapels in Europe, or not the chapel, the cathedrals in Europe, that like high art and explicit presentation of the gospel can coexist. And I think it has to do with calling, and it has to do with the fact that if you were trying to convey the truth of the gospel in art, then it demands even more of you artistically. You have to, it doesn't let you off the hook. It does the opposite. And so anyway, I just kind of reached this point where I was like, I don't want to say anymore that I'm not a Christian artist when most of my songs mention Jesus explicitly. It's just kind of part of the deal. So then once again, working on my new book, I was heard somebody talking about Genesis 1 and how when God creates trees, it says he created them to be pleasing to the eye and for bearing fruit. So some trees are made just because they're pretty, and other trees are there because you can pluck fruit from them and eat them, right? And I think art's the same way. I think that some art is just beautiful, and there's mystery involved, and it exists in the world, and it just makes the world more bearable. Like, I'm glad that these movies exist, glad that these novels exist. They need to be in the world. And then there are other kinds of art, and it's hymn writers and Christian poets and Michelangelo, whoever, who are writing things that are like good for fruit. Like, they're beautiful to look at, but they're also things that are there to nourish and to edify very specifically. And so that's kind of where I land on the Christian art thing. And I don't even remember what your question was.
It doesn't matter because you just spit out a bunch of gold.
Oh,
Hey,
well.
this is totally irrelevant to the podcast listeners, so I'm sorry for those of you listening. But as you're writing your book, did you happen to hear the series that the Bible Project did, the podcast series on trees? Okay, good, awesome.
I loved it.
Me too. Okay, all right, great.
Fascinating. Yeah, I listened. So yeah, everybody should listen to it because it's great.
Yeah.
And that was kind of part of the genesis of the idea for the book.
Okay, great. I can't wait to read your book then, because that was one of my favorite series that they did on the podcast. But let's go back to our podcast. So let me ask you this. You have a lot of worship leaders who they write songs, and maybe they're trying to write songs for their church, but maybe half of those songs don't even see the light of day. Just they don't feel. So I guess my question is, does creativity always need to have an audience? Or like the golden poppy that pops up on the far side of a hill in Afghanistan and is never seen by anyone, it's served its purpose simply by being a poppy? Like, I know that's a very
Oh, I love it.
fluffy way to say it, but like, does creativity matter if it's not seen?
Yes, is this short, simple answer, because God clearly demonstrates, that beauty matters, even if it's on the far side of a mountain. And however, I would say God in that case is the audience. So it like, I don't want to say that, like, some of the great poets, Gerard Manley Hopkins and George Herbert, who wrote their poems, 100, 400 years ago, respectively. My understanding is that they were never published in their lifetime.
Wow.
So they had these poems that lived in their journal, and that didn't stop them. And Van Gogh only sold one painting in his lifetime. He really wanted to, but he just didn't. But these guys, like, you get the sense that they were like committed to making these things for the Lord, and their own edification, and they were making these things because they were compelled to do it. And then somebody found them and published them, and 400 years later, they affect us.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. But if that happened with them, imagine the untold people who wrote poems in journals and they were lost forever.
Right.
And that is not lost. My brother is a playwright and a novelist, and he's brilliant. And a few years ago, he He committed to writing a poem a day, just because he was like, I'm just going to try to learn poetry, a poem a day. And I think it was summertime, so he'd written 150 or so poems. He went to the beach and lost the journal. So he had his leather journal. Every poem was lost, and I was just devastated. I was like, "Are you kidding?" And he was like, "Oh, it doesn't matter." And I was like, "What do you mean it doesn't matter?" He was like, "Well, the point wasn't because I was going to try to publish them. The point was for me to learn poetry,
Wow.
and none of it was lost because the work was also being done in him."
Yeah.
Process. So, there's a sense in which that's very true. At the same time, though, like if it's just self-expression, if it's not love, then it can be a dead end. So at some point, I think that like Walt Wongren said, art isn't really art until it's experienced by another.
Oh,
And so
wow.
there's an exchange that happens where someone else hears the thing, and then now you've got a story, and there's a connection, and it's a part of their world and yours, and now it's like it's taken on a new life. And so that's not to like denigrate the people who are afraid to share their stuff, or they're doing it it's between them and the Lord. But at the same time, like be brave enough to share it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be great.
Yeah.
You just have to start doing the work of letting people in,
Yeah.
inviting people in. So that said, for the worship leaders who are out there working on things, like it's crucial to be a student of the craft. You're not just anyway. I'm tangenting again. That word. But does that get to your question?
Absolutely. No, I love it. And I think a few years ago, I did an interview with Andy Rozier from Chicago, Vertical Worship. And he said, because they have a little cohort of songwriters, and not everybody's really like allowed to be part of that cohort because not everybody has the same gifting. But his encouragement to everybody is like, hey guys, like write songs for the Lord. Like, even if you're not part of this cohort, like write songs for the Lord. Feel free to submit them, but let that time that you spend writing that song just be your time communing with God. And if that song never goes anywhere and never serves any other purpose than you communing with God, like that was a very high and holy purpose,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned something too about the poetry and the poems, about how I think it was your brother or your brother-in-law, like he said, oh, it doesn't matter, like you said, what did you say? You said the work was being done in him. And I'm sure you've written hundreds, maybe thousands of songs that people have never heard. You've probably written hundreds of pages that were never published, but each song and each page is equally as important. Maybe they're not all as equally as good as each other, but they're equally as important because they contribute to or lead you to the next iteration of creativity, right? It's like it all stacks on each other. So it's never wasted, right?
Yeah, and I almost feel like there are two conversations. One is the conversation about art for its own sake, just as a like an expression of your delight in the Lord, or you're wrestling through something, and that's kind of what's happening there. And then there's the career question, like, okay, I want to actually do this for a living. I want to like kind of like commit my life to learning a craft and trying to learn it really well, and to do and to communicate in that way. It's almost like two different questions, like, and that's a matter of calling. It's like some people, I would never want to tell people don't write poetry just because you won't get paid for it.
Right.
But if you step into a career where you're like, I'm going to try, I don't think in the next 10 years I'm going to write a great song, but in the next 20, maybe I'll write a few, like it's the long game that you're interested in. And it's like finding a way to grow as an artist. That's a whole different thing. You know what I mean? And that's where like in many ways the conversation changes, because you are now talking about becoming a student of a craft, as opposed to art or poetry or songwriting as a way of communing with the Lord. So yeah.
No, it's good. Yeah, and I'd love to stay not on the how do you become a songwriter side, because I feel like there's a million podcasts about that. It's like I just want us to really like do some good deep work around creativity. So I would love to hear. I know everybody's different, but how do you stay inspired and creative just in general? Because sometimes you just feel like you got nothing to give.
Yeah. Yeah. For years I joked that like a sure way to stay productive as an artist is to have a mortgage payment. Like it kind of forces you to like, okay, I'm not messing around. I've got to do this thing, you know.
Yeah.
It yeah. I When I went to college, it was this little Christian college in Florida. It was like I paid somebody to make me read my Bible for 4 years. And so you actually put things in your life that force you
Mm.
to do the hard work, because most of it isn't super fun. A lot of it is frustrating and miserable. And um, I don't actually enjoy. When you said earlier, you're like, maybe I've written thousands of songs that nobody's ever heard. Actually, that's not true. I've written most of the songs I've written have been on my records. You know,
Nice.
I have a lot of half songs, and I'll work on something, and once I'm disillusioned with it, or I feel like I'm barking up the wrong tree, I abandon it.
I got it.
I may circle back around in 2 years, but most of the stuff that I do, uh, it's like weeding a garden. Like when I'm like, I got to go do it because I know that if I want the garden to be pretty, I got to get rid of these weeds. But man, it ain't fun. That
Yeah.
part ain't fun. And so the same thing with songwriting. When like I'm about to make a new record or something, I'm like, deep breath. Like here we go. You know,
Mm.
it is a scary process. The blank page is intimidating. You feel like you've said everything there is to say. There's all the self-doubt, the self-loathing, there's a real spiritual battle that's going on in you when you're working on stuff.
Hmm.
Um, uh, it's worth it, but it's not. I'm always envious and a little skeptical of the people who are like, I write because I have to. I sit down, I just wake up and I just write because it's all coming out of me. And I just want to be like, wow, what would that be like?
Yeah.
I have so many other interests, and I think that can be a good thing, is to do things, spin a few plates at once, so that kind of like writing a few songs at once. If you get stuck on one, you can just pivot and work on the other one for a while.
Hmm.
But for me, one of the biggest, most important life-giving practices has been getting outside and doing things that were in real communication and contact with the made world, like the
Mm.
actual non-cerebral, not theoretical, actual dirt,
Yeah.
actual stones shoved into actual slots and walls.
Mm.
I think that if you're in like an artistic career, you spend so much time in your head that you begin to think that that's all that there is,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and there's a great book called Living into Focus that I read years ago by Arthur Boers, and he talks about how, especially if you are a person who has a job that requires a lot of head work, that you need to have a focal practice, which is something that gets you in contact with creation, in community with other people. It inspires a sense of awe. It
Mm.
requires discipline. So for me, it was rock wall building and beekeeping and gardening, and those things like ended up being providing the subject matter for like whole albums,
Mm.
because the heavens declare the glory of God.
Right.
The sky above proclaims his handiwork. It's like all of creation is preaching sermons all the time. And in the last 100 years, most of us don't garden anymore. We're not farmers anymore. We're inside a lot of the time. We do this
Hmm.
computery head work. And so we have cut ourselves off from this megaphone of inspiration and gospel preaching that is happening, just kind of spilling out of creation itself. So it has been like, I can't overstate how important it is. Like, you don't need a lot of land. Like, get a raised bed, literally. Buy some tomatoes at the hardware store, grow something,
Yeah.
and I guarantee you that it will enhance and kind of augment whatever it is else that you're doing.
That's so good. So all the worship leaders who are stuck on their planning center screens and their smartphones and their social media need to go get outside. Thank you.
Yes, I really, really believe that
Yeah.
deeply. Yeah.
I feel you. Now, like I see that outsideness coming into your writing and into your songwriting and all those things. And like I want to talk a little bit about the Wingfeather Saga, because this book, and I'm just going to tell the listeners, like, you just have to trust me and buy all four of the books, okay? Even if you don't have young, because it's probably aimed at like, it could be like, I'm 35. I loved it as much as my 9-year-olds. So, and my 6-year-olds. So anyway, but you created entire worlds, histories, maps, deep, complex, intricate, believable characters. I thought people like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien were an extinct breed because we live in a digital, distracted generation. And yet you proved me wrong with like, you have all these backstories and like footnotes and all sorts of just, kind of like dialects and all this stuff, right? Well, I would love to know, like, how do you stay focused enough to actually think deeply and get into that state of flow and push the ball forward in your creative pursuits? Because I think the biggest killer of creativity is fragmented thinking, which is what we're all fighting. So how does Andrew Peterson fight against fragmented thinking?
Man, fragmented thinking. I hadn't heard that phrase before, but I know exactly what you mean when you say that, especially this year, right? In the last 12 months or so with COVID. Like, I've talked to so many people who tell me that, and it was really comforting when somebody was like, I just can't focus. I sit down and I can't get anything done. And our brains are dealing with all this anxiety and everything's kind of upended. So I totally get that. For me, I heard somebody say one time that being a writer and having an internet connection is like being a carpenter and having a television on the back of your hammer. I think that's so true. The internet is just the worst. And so if you're trying to get something real done, right? Yeah. And so it's really simple, but I downloaded an app called Self-Control. It's on my computer right now. And I've got a chunk of time to write, I turn on the app, and basically it limits the internet for the amount of time that you set. So I turn it on. Even if I restart the computer, I still can't go to Twitter or Facebook or anything. The funny thing is, you add the web pages to this list, and I would open up my computer, I'd sit down to start working, and your brain starts trying to find a way out, right? Yeah. And I'd be like, I wonder what the exact degree it is outside. And I would find myself going to the Weather Channel constantly, or weather.com. And so I had to add that to the thing. And then I'd be like, I wonder if anything bad has happened in the world. And I had to add all the news, So the list keeps getting longer because your brain it knows that it's connected to this window where it can get the endorphins, And so that's the biggest thing to me. And the other thing is getting into a rhythm. It's like with the Wingfeather books, I remember that I had a goal of 2,000 words a day, and I would wake up in the morning, I'd have my coffee, and I'd start writing. Usually at the coffee shop, I'd go to the coffee shop down the road and camp out, and I wouldn't allow myself to eat lunch until I had written 2,000 words. And it was just an unbreakable rule. And a book, is about 100,000 words. And so if you adhere to that rule strictly, you can have a first draft in 50 days. 2 months, and that's amazing. People, when you look at like Dickens and these guys that have these immense libraries of work by the time they died, it's because they wrote, I think it was him who wrote 500 words a day. That was it. Anybody can do that. So getting in a rhythm where it's just like a part of your day, that's the thing.
So it's a habit. Yeah, that's so good. And being mean to yourself by not letting yourself eat. So that's good. Helps. I like that. Now, something you kind of said about like just showing up at the coffee shop and forcing yourself to do it. It reminds me, I think is it Stephen King who said like, amateurs wait for inspiration and the professionals just show up and do the work. Yeah. Like it's kind of like that, right?
It is very much like that. Yep. Yeah. His book on writing was really helpful when I was first starting working on the book. I remember there was a point where I was addicted to reading books about how to write books. And there's a huge market for it. You go to Barnes and Noble, you can see whole sections of like how to publish your first novel, whatever. And a lot of people are making a lot of money off of people's procrastination. You know what I mean? And I went and met with a novelist here in town, and I said, hey, I'm trying to write my first book. What do I do? And which books do I read? And he said, stop reading those books. Like the only way you're going to write the book is to write the book. Yeah. So that's the thing is you just have to decide to do it. Yeah. Anne Lamott, I heard her say one time that if you want to finish the book or the project you're working on, stop not doing it. And it's so simple, but it's just so true. We know it. You just have to stop not doing it. Just do it.
Yeah. And maybe there are some worship leaders listening, and it's like whatever that project is that you just keep distracting yourself away from, like God wants you to bring that into the world, to birth that into the world. And this is Andrew Peterson and Alex and Theagin's way of saying, just do it, y'all. Nike, just do it. So let's see what we can see birthed into the world through this conversation.
I would say another good idea is to bite off more than you can chew by committing to something. Like sometimes we'll put a date on the calendar for a show and I'll be like, okay, there's no wiggling out of it now. I've got to do it. I've got to come up with that concert or whatever it may be.
Right. Right.
So forcing your own hand is the thing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's committing to a project that you have no idea how you're going to get done, and one that you can't do alone. So you're going to be like, well, I'm just going to have to do this and trust that those people are going to show up to help me finish this thing. And they will, they just do. So that's the thing. You have to relinquish quite a bit of control, and be willing to fail miserably, and just kind of step out into the thing. It's all often about building the bridge while you're crossing the chasm. You just kind of are like, you don't know what you're making it up as you go. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the deal.
I love that. That's such a practical thing. So like put the night of worship on the calendar and publish it to the church. And now you have to do it. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit about like planning versus spontaneity in creativity. Like a lot of it sounds like you're showing up, with a goal and you're just going to hit that goal. How much of it is spontaneous, or does the spontaneousness come in the structuredness?
Yes, I would say that's it. There has to be a little bit of structure, but the barest framework, and that leaves room for spontaneity. When I was like, not to keep going back to the book writing thing, but there's so much overlap. It's all kind of the same. But like, I know when I was working out the Wingfeather Saga, there would be chapter synopses that I would write, and so I would, just a paragraph maybe of what happened in each chapter, and I would write about 5 chapters of those until the story got so hazy that I didn't know what came next, and then I'd go back and write the actual chapters, right? And so in the writing of the chapters that I had kind of like written the bullet points of, inevitably the story would have shifted by the time I got to where the outline was, and I'd have to scratch those next few chapters and start the next chapter synopses. So you just like lay out this like really loose framework, and then and with the full expectation that I'm probably never going to get to where the outline said.
Wow.
And so I think songwriting's that way too, man. Like it's amazing how many times you have a clear sense of like what the song is supposed to be, and then the song just defies you. Like it says no. You just feel like it won't let you do the thing you want to do. And it takes a long time to recognize that push and pull, and kind of learn to like, well, maybe the chorus is supposed to be something completely different than I thought it was going to be. And that's when you invite community in, and you get co-writers, and the song becomes about the process becomes about how do we make this song what it wants to become, not how do I look as cool as possible. How do I hold on to some sense of having control over the thing.
That's so huge. And I think just that little nugget of bringing other people into the process, obviously inviting God into the process as a co-laborer with you. And it's interesting that the art itself is kind of a co-laborer with you. Like that piece of art kind of has its own agenda that it wants to, like, it's got its own path that it's going to run, like with your book or with a song. We've all experienced that. But then like bringing in the community piece as well, I think is so huge. Man, I would love to ask you in terms of like creating versus editing, or creating versus refining. Do you see those things as separate, or do they happen at the same time, or do you just like let yourself get all your words out and then come back and tweak it? How do you see that?
I think refining is the fun part. The creating is the real difficult part. I don't co-write very often, but my daughter's a songwriter, and really, really good songwriter, and she will still text me new songs and be like, I do the dad thing where I'm like, oh, it's amazing, way to go, and it is. But then after the first couple listens, I'll be like, do you want feedback? And she's always like, yes, hit me, give me more. And I love that feeling, that kind of like rephrasing things and making it so that the so that the idea of the song is cohesive. Like that kind of stuff is, I geek out. It's like a crossword puzzle almost. Like I like moving the stuff around. So the refining is my favorite part. It's starting with nothing and getting the first draft done that is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And they, to me, feel very different.
Yeah.
And so having verse, chorus, bridge, chorus is the hard part. And then playing it for your friend, and all of a sudden the song's warts are very apparent. But you've got the hard work done, you know.
Yeah.
Now you tweak these ideas. I always say that like that first performance of a song is like taking your mom to your favorite movie, and that's when you realize how much bad cussing there is in it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, oh man, no, I forgot. I didn't really realize how bad this was.
Yeah.
And so that's a crucial part of the process, is like share it with somebody, and then all of a sudden you're exposed, and you gotta tweak. But the tweaking, like I said, is the real fun part. You can also over tweak. You can
How do you know that was one of my questions? How do you know when a work of art is done? Like, how do you know that this is what it was supposed to be? How do you not over tweak?
I don't know. That is the question of the ages. You just don't know.
Yeah.
I have a sense of I like for there needs to be some humanity in the song. Like when I think of over tweaking, I think of removing every little, you know, odd angle, you know, that's on the thing, until what you have is this smooth and perfectly round, perfectly auto-tuned, you know, perfectly structured thing that is so slick that it isn't even human anymore. That kills me. And it makes me think of Rich Mullins, who am a huge Rich Mullins fan. One of his bandmates told me one time that you know, the hammered dulcimer has got a million strings on it. Yeah. They're hard to tune. And they were in the studio, and Michael, this friend of mine, was tuning the dulcimer. It took him like an hour, just meticulously tuning the dulcimer to get it ready for the studio. And Rich walked by and saw him, and he was like, "Oh, thanks for tuning that. Make sure you bang on it a bunch to get it out of tune before we record it, or it won't sound like a dulcimer." Wow. Isn't that great? And it's true. It's like, if it's so perfect that it can lose its character. And I think that's an analogy for sometimes what we do with songs. Like somebody said one time that like the worse a person's voice is, the better a person's voice is, the harder they are to believe. But when you think about Tom Waits or you know, these singers who have this like little bit of like cool pitchiness, or their humanity is in there, you know. It's not a hard and fast rule, but the heart behind it is that like we have been given these tools thanks to the digital age, which are really helpful, but they also can suck the life out of things, you know. They allow us to just kind of like refine, and that's why people still love hearing folk music and live music, is because we need wrong notes. We need a little bit of pitchiness to remind ourselves that we're human.
Yeah, it's not just all digital robots created by computers. Like, it's just it's like there's no soul. I remember seeing a sticker that says like drum machines have no soul, you know, which is all of our music nowadays, you know, even worship music, it's all to the grid, auto-tuned. Even my church's live stream, like they started, I like it because it's like it tightens it up, but we started adding a little bit of auto-tune, just, you know, tighten up the vocals a little bit. But it's like, you're right, then there's, at least in the room, it's not, you know, at least in the room you get the real gritty, like human experience. But
that said, thank the Lord for auto-tune.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's like things about it that I'm like, oh man, I'm so glad we were able to fix that little thing.
Yeah, I don't have to go redo the whole take, right? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So I don't want to sound like a Luddite, but at the same time, I think that we just have to find the balance between it being human and excellence. Like if you can get both of them together, that's where the real magic sauce is. And you know, I think I like, not to keep harping on it, but one of my favorite Rich Mullins album titles is Winds of Heaven, Stuff of Earth. And it's like both of those are phrases from two different songs, but I feel like that conveys what I loved about him, was that he had this ability to write with this lofty poetry, but also very grounded and earthy. So he would have these big, beautiful Old Testament sounding lines along with lines about Kansas and motorcycles. And that mashup of humanity and glory, which is the incarnation of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Jesus is fully human and fully God. And so in our songs, like if we can do that, if we can find a way to get to this like breathtaking beauty that is also very earthy and grounded
Mm.
in like the kind of, and I don't want to say imperfection, but in the humanness
Yeah.
of what our lives are like with the mess, the grime and the glory. There's something there, you know, that a lot of our modern songs are missing.
Yeah, yeah, the realness and of reality that we all experience. It's like we've, even lyrically, we've polished, like it's just all Christianese. You know, half of the songs are just like Christianese. It doesn't really say anything like where earth meets heaven, you know, like it's like, no, what does it look like when it's this? And the podcast listeners, like, I can't see your hands, Alex, but like, what does it look like when it's earth kisses heaven? And like, what is that, you know, feel like, and what do we say, and how do we experience that, instead of just like, I have my nice little grid of Christian lyrics that I put into a box and I put this guitar effect on the guitar, and it's just like, it's so,
It's
yeah.
so easy. We have that little arsenal of, like you said, Christianese, and we need a rhyme, and so we sacrifice the integrity of the line or the integrity of what we're saying in order to make the line land.
Mm,
Um, and I just like to me, it's not that, you know, songs are necessarily bad. I just get a sense of laziness, and I don't mean to sound snooty when I say that, but just, you know, I'll be in church and it'll be some new song and I'll be like, man, all you had to do was work 10 more minutes on that phrase.
yeah.
Or you know, have studied James Taylor and Paul Simon and the hymn writers and the great poets, people who like words are their currency. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
care about words, care about how you say things, and like how much meaning is packed into these little phrases. And there's more to it than just goosebumps and and you know, sounding like everything else. Like if like the long game is about caring about those things deeply, and so that it gives you this extra nudge to stay up 30 more minutes that night to
Mm-hmm.
really find the right answer to the question that the song is asking, you know.
Yeah. I would love to ask you, I have like three more questions. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but just words, you said words, right? Words matter, whether we're preaching, whether we're writing, whether we're communicating to our team, whether we are writing a song. And, you know, you've written a lot of books and you've studied until your friend told you to stop studying. You've studied how to write. And I'm going to make an observation, and then I'd love some additional thoughts from you. But I've noticed, well, let me ask the question. The question is, what are some of the most important lessons you've learned about creating with words, using words? Let me make one observation that I see in your books and in your songs, and especially, is he worthy? So I notice you open a question loop. You create a mystery that you want, the listener wants to resolve, and they're waiting for the answer. For example, you know, is he worthy? Is he worthy? He is. Or in the Wingfeather Saga, you build all these unanswered questions into the chapters, and then the listener wants to keep, or the reader wants to keep reading, because it's like, I have to close the loop. So that's one writing technique that I see you utilizing just brilliantly. But what are some other things you've learned about using words well?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Is very kind of you. I think to me it's about narrative. And you know, when I moved to Nashville back in the late '90s, you know, it was before the worship movement, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and so back then, you know, the songs that were on Christian radio were more like singer-songwriter type songs.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know exactly how it all happened, but suddenly there was this big worship explosion, and uh, and one of the interesting things about it is that most of the, not all the time, but much of the time, we also lost narrative. We lost this, the fact that a song has an arc that it follows, and you know, we kind of come out of the gate with a catchy hook and a catchy chorus and whatever, and there's no real progression
Mm.
thought that the song leads you through. And you know, that's kind of just a preference thing. I just, that's how those are the kind of songs that I like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I like feeling like I went on a little journey in 3 minutes,
Yeah.
musically and otherwise. But I remember you know, I've had some songs on the radio, but my music didn't translate terribly well for Christian radio as what it became. And I, found out later that the way they choose a lot of the songs that get played on Christian radio is testing. And so they get a bunch of their target audience in a room, and you literally listen to a 5-second section of a song. And that's how much they have to vote on whether or not they would change the channel or stay on the channel.
Wow.
Which means that there is no narrative. There is no possibility that you could develop an idea musically, that you could start really small and the song grows and becomes something else by the end. Like you can't, that's gone, on the radio. And again, there are definitely exceptions, and I'm not bashing radio. They're doing what they can do. But but I think that's part of it, is like I'm fascinated by, from a songwriting standpoint, how so few words can convey an idea and have you crying on the interstate in 3 minutes, right? It's fascinating to me. And poetry is even harder. Poetry, even you're even more naked. You're stripped down to just words. You don't even have like the advantage of a modulation, to really bring home an idea. You've just got words. And so I'm fascinated by the fact that words have this life-changing power built into them. And so I don't know really how to answer the question, except to say that, like, if you as a songwriter, even if you're writing, worship songs or children's worship songs, whatever, like it can only help you to become a student of words. Like take seriously your craft enough to actually figure out what poetry really is. You know what I mean? If you go to an art museum and there's a painting that you hate, maybe you're the one with the problem, right? Maybe you're the one who needs to humble yourself enough to go, what is it that this painting is saying? And eavesdrop as the docent explains it to the group, and then you can look at it again and see something better, and you're going to grow. So I would just encourage the people out there who are songwriting or whatever craft you're involved in, like take it seriously enough to actually like become a student. Like pick somebody who's really well known and really well respected that you don't like, and spend a week trying to figure out why they're a big deal.
Yeah.
For me, that was Bob Dylan. I didn't like Bob Dylan, and then I decided to commit to a record, and I listened to it like 10 times, and I hated it all 10 times. But the 11th time I loved it. And I was like, okay, that's why Bob Dylan's amazing, So you kind of got to do your homework and become a student of the thing. Like I'm mystified sometimes that some songwriters don't delight in words. I don't know if I could probably ask you this. I remember in 8th grade, my English teacher wrote the word edify on the chalkboard, and she said, "This is my favorite word, edify. What are your favorite words?" And so the class was all like, "Oh, wow." So we started thinking about it. And for a long time, edify was my go-to because I just love the sound of it.
Yeah.
I love what it means. But then confluence has overtaken edify. I love the word confluence. For when two rivers come together. There's a ring to it. Annie Dillard said that sycamore was the most pleasing word in the English language. So like delighting in the actual sound of a word and the rhythm of it, then you get into like when you're writing your songs, you've got more tools in the toolbox to kind of like go, words have power that you don't really realize. There's more underneath the ground than we give it credit for sometimes.
I'm very glad you didn't ask me what my favorite word was, because I was like, what is my favorite word? I don't know.
Think about it.
Peterson.
I hope you'll think about it this week, though. Seriously.
I will take you up on that. I'm going to write it down on my to-do list right here. Okay. So just 2 more questions. Criticism obviously is a big part of being creative. You have to put your work out there, like you said, and people misunderstand you. I'm sure people have misunderstood the Wingfeather Saga. I think you even wrote a little part in the front, like, hey, parents, like you might think these books are a little bit dark or disturbing, but here's why I'm doing it. I'm sure you've gotten criticisms and misunderstandings about different things you put out there. How do you handle criticism, and how do you let it inform the future of your creativity?
I think one of the best defenses against criticism is community. Is having, the voices that are out there that are bashing you, or, I've had a little bit of that. The internet has created this environment where we can be meaner than we really are. And it's hard. But there have been things that I have, risks that I've taken where I've been like, okay, here's a song that I'm pretty sure people are going to get mad about. I vet those things pretty seriously with people that I love and respect, and make sure that I know that I've thought through the process, right?
Mhm.
That I've thought through everything, so that I know that even if I do get criticized, I can sleep at night knowing that I checked with my community and made sure that this was true from a gospel standpoint.
Mm.
And yeah, it's like, it's gonna happen, and you will survive it. And also sometimes they're right. Like there's it's funny, when I was young, I was in college, I did a concert in outside of Orlando, and I remember I got a letter in the mail from that church about a week later, and I was so excited. I was like, did I just get my first fan mail? And I opened it up, and it was from this old lady in the church who just laid into me, told me everything I did wrong, everything I said wrong. But she said things like, you weren't well dressed, you rambled too much, you didn't respect our time because you went 30 minutes long. She just kind of went for it.
Wow.
And I called the pastor. I was like, I just got this mean letter. And he was like, was it from so and so? And I was like, yes. He was like, oh, don't worry about her, I get those letters all the time. And so I kind of put it away. And I was doing a talk at some event, and I was like, you know what, that might be a funny icebreaker. I'm going to get that letter out and read it as a joke. And I dug it out and read it, and I agreed with everything she said.
Wow.
I was like, oh my goodness, like she was absolutely right. I absolutely rambled. I didn't present myself well. I didn't what so I was kind of like, it was easy for me at the time to blow it off, but I needed to hear it. She
Mm.
didn't say it in the nicest way she could have. But
Yeah.
the point is, like, criticism sometimes is like exactly what you need,
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't know, but community is the real answer to that. The other thing I was going to say was Flannery O'Connor, who, this great American author who was a Christian, was what her stories are super difficult, like really hard to understand. Um, um, I'm a fan, and I still don't know what to make of some of her stories. But she was a Christian.
That's like me with the
And
Bible.
yeah, yeah, totally. And so there was this weird sense that she talked about how willing she was to be misunderstood. She was like, God is the one that I'm trying to write for,
Mm.
and I'm putting these things out into the world with the hope that the Holy Spirit is going to use these things to do His work. And apart from my obedience and me working as hard as I can to make the thing as good as I can, at that point, it's none of my business. Like,
Mhm.
it goes out into the world, and then it's God's business what He does with it.
Mhm.
And she had a pretty extreme version of that, but I think a little bit of that is just kind of one of the best things we can do. We write the song, we plant the seed. What is it? Paul watered the seed, but God
Yeah.
makes it grow. That whole thing.
Mhm.
So I think that, like, if we are sure that in the confines of our church and our community that what we're saying is what we mean to be saying, that criticism just kind of becomes you know a non-issue.
That's so good. That's so good. All right. So here's my last question for you, Mr. Peterson. Um, so I'm going to ask it, and then I'm going to tell you to do something before you answer it. So I'd love for you to give like an encouragement to the worship leaders and the pastors listening. How would you like to see the church be more creative? How would you like the church be more creative? Or wait, how would you like to see the church be more creative? Now, before you answer it, I want you to tell our listeners where they can connect with you online. I want um, tell them about where they can get Adorning the Dark. Tell them about the Rabbit Room. Where they can follow you on social. Whatever you want to say there, and then we'll get back to that question. See, I'm pulling in Andrew Peterson right here. They want the answer, so they're gonna have to flip the
Nice.
page.
You're also
Okay.
giving me time to sort out how to answer that hard question.
Okay. Good.
I would say, so Andrew-Peterson.com.
Mhm.
If you leave the dash out, it will send you to the Andrew Peterson, who is a thriller novelist. So unless you're into that, don't go there. So Andrew-Peterson, you can just Google me. And then the Rabbit Room, rabbitroom.com, which is a ministry I'm a part of, that is kind of supports the arts, and is a celebration of the way God speaks through story, art, and music. And a lot of really cool stuff there. We publish books and and have conferences and that kind of stuff. And I love what the Rab Room is doing. And then you can get to there from my website too. And then the Wingfeather.
Sorry, I lost you at the very end. Wingfeather, but hopefully it recorded on your end.
Sorry. Wingfeathersaga.com or my website. Yeah, that'll get you there. And same thing with Adorning the Dark. Like, it's all Googleable.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll put links in the show notes for everything. So first of all, before you answer, Andrew, I just want to thank you personally for your faithfulness to pursue creativity with a gospel-centered heart, because it has impacted my life. It's impacted my children's lives. It's become a central part of our life, the characters in your book. And I just thank you for that. So thank you for being faithful and for creating well. And thank you for this conversation. So now, how would you like to see churches be more creative?
Well, thank you, Alex. I think that I'll answer with a story. My son, the same one we were talking about earlier, who's an art student, when he was about 15 years old, we go to this little Anglican church here in town, and the pastor, it was Trinity Sunday, and the pastor asked Aiden, without even checking with me, he just went straight to the source and said, "Hey, can I commission you to paint the Trinity for Trinity Sunday," which was like a month later. Like, so think about that for a second. Imagine trying to paint the Trinity, paint a concept that none of us can understand. Yeah. And so Aiden, my son, spent the next month like researching, ancient art and iconography and all this kind of stuff to try to like get his head around the Trinity, read the Bible a ton, studied it, and then, spent a long time painting this amazing painting that Aiden framed himself at 15, and showed up that Sunday, gave it to the pastor, and he had an easel set up next to the door. So everybody who filed into the church looked at the painting and oohed and awed, and I was the dad, like, so proud of my son, But then the pastor gets up and he puts the easel next to the pulpit and he preaches the whole sermon and he's referencing the images. And then he takes the painting down and he gave it to the front row and said, "Pass this around while I'm talking." And so I sat there in the back weeping. A, because I was so proud of my son and the good work that he did, but B, because I can't even imagine what a profound difference it would have made in my life as a 15-year-old kid if the church had looked at me and said, "Hey, there's a seat at the table for you. There's a way for you to serve and to use your gifts here, and we want to celebrate those things." Like, I can't tell you how much time and pain it would have saved me, because it was part of the reason the Rabbit Room exists, is because I have this real heart for people who are kind of creating in isolation, or who are beset by voices that are telling them they stink, or that nobody wants to know what they have to hear, what they have to say. But like, the kingdom is all about this wedding feast where God says, "Pull up a chair. There, you are invited to this feast." And so finding a way for the people in your congregation and their diversity of gifts to demonstrate to them that they are seen and that they are valued and that there is a seat for them, I see all these beautiful signs of that in the church. This is not a gripe. This is me saying that I see that happen and I get really excited about it. Yeah. So that's what I would say, that the more you can push back at this idea that that creativity is limited to the arts, the better. Like, creativity is cooking and architecture and running a business and hospitality, all kinds of things. All of those things are creative pursuits, and the arts only make up a small piece of that pie. And so just like ennobling the good work that everybody can do is one of the calls of the church.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew, for just so much wisdom, so much gold. I've been helped and encouraged by this conversation. I know our listeners have. So thank you for making the time. I know you're a busy man and you've got some walls to stack, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, man. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.